Laura Bennett had not planned for anything unusual that afternoon, and that was exactly why the knock felt so sharp, almost out of place, as if it didn't belong to her quiet day. The house was calm, the sky outside was gray with light rain, and she had been moving from room to room doing small tasks, trying to keep her thoughts steady while her husband Mark was away on a work trip, something that had become normal over the years but still left a hollow silence behind. And when the doorbell rang again, louder this time, she paused with her hand on the hallway table, feeling a strange tension rise in her chest before she even reached the door, unsure why her heart was already beating faster. And when she opened it, the sight in front of her changed the rhythm of the entire day, because standing there was Daniel Carter, Mark's longtime friend, someone she knew well but had not seen in years, his coat damp from the rain, his hair slightly messy, his posture uncertain as if he had debated turning back more than once, and for a brief second neither of them spoke, the space between them filled with memories that arrived all at once, memories of shared dinners, quiet laughter, long talks that once felt harmless but had always carried something deeper beneath the surface. And Daniel broke the silence first by saying her name softly, not casually, not loudly, but in a way that made it sound important, like he had practiced it in his mind before coming, and Laura felt a tightness in her throat because she hadn't expected him, hadn't prepared herself for the mix of surprise and familiarity that washed over her, and she noticed his eyes immediately, how they searched her face as if looking for something he wasn't sure he deserved to find. And though he smiled politely, there was hesitation behind it, a heaviness that told her this visit was not random, and he apologized for coming without warning, explaining he was back in town briefly and had spoken to Mark earlier, that Mark had mentioned she would be home, and Laura nodded, still processing his presence, stepping aside to let him in, aware of how the simple act of opening the door felt like opening something else she had long kept closed. And as Daniel entered the house, shaking the rain from his coat, Laura noticed how carefully he moved, how he looked around the living room as if the walls themselves held stories, and she suddenly became aware of herself, of how her hair was loosely tied, how she was dressed comfortably, not expecting company, and yet she felt strangely seen, more than she had felt in a long time. And as she closed the door behind him, the sound echoed slightly, marking a moment that felt heavier than it should have been, and Daniel commented on how little the house had changed, how it still felt warm and familiar, and Laura replied politely, guiding him inside, offering him a seat, offering tea, keeping her voice steady even as her thoughts moved quickly, because she sensed something unspoken in the air, something that had traveled with him and now sat between them. And as they settled into the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows, Laura realized this visit had already shifted the balance of her quiet afternoon, and though no dramatic words had been spoken yet, she felt certain that this was not just a friendly stop or a casual catch-up, but the beginning of a moment that would leave a mark, whether she wanted it to or not, because from the way Daniel looked at her, with restraint mixed with emotion, she understood that some feelings, even when ignored for years, could return quietly, without warning, and speak through silence alone. Laura poured the tea, her hand slightly trembling even though she told herself it was just the chill from the rain, and when she handed Daniel his cup, their fingers brushed briefly, a touch so light it could have been nothing, yet it sent a shiver through her that she quickly tried to ignore. And they began to talk about ordinary things at first, Mark's recent work projects, Daniel's move back to town, the weather, small updates about friends and neighbors, keeping the conversation polite, careful, each sentence a layer over the tension that had quietly built the moment he stepped inside. Yet beneath the words, Laura could feel the unspoken currents, the things they both wanted to say but hadn't found the courage for, and Daniel's eyes kept returning to her, soft but searching, revealing a depth she hadn't seen before, a mixture of regret and nostalgia, curiosity and something warmer. And she felt her own heart respond without permission, memories of laughter and late-night talks flickering behind her eyes, moments from years ago when life had been simpler, or at least had seemed that way. And then, almost suddenly, Daniel spoke differently, his voice lowering, more serious, more intimate. "You look tired," he said, and it wasn't just about the physical, she could tell, it was concern, an understanding of the invisible burdens she carried, and she managed a small smile, admitting lightly that life had been busy, but her voice faltered for a moment, betraying the weight she hadn't shared with anyone, not even Mark, and Daniel nodded, listening, and there was a pause that felt like it stretched on too long. The air thick with the things they were both thinking but avoiding, and then he said, I used to think about this house, about you, about how things turned out, and it wasn't casual, it was deliberate, and Laura felt a flutter in her chest, caught off guard by the honesty, by the sudden unveiling of emotions that had lain dormant, and she realized that Daniel's visit was more than coincidence or courtesy. It was an attempt to bridge a gap that had always existed, a gap filled with what-ifs and unsaid words, and she felt a mix of fear and longing, unsure how to respond, because these were dangerous emotions for her heart, emotions that reminded her of past tenderness and the possibility of what might have been if choices had been different, and Daniel continued, some things never really leave you, and the simplicity of the sentence carried a world of meaning, making Laura aware of her own suppressed feelings, the quiet acknowledgement that their connection had never completely faded, that even in absence, in years of ordinary routines and marital life, there were threads of understanding and affection that remained unbroken, and she realized how much she had missed this, how much she had forgotten the subtle pull of someone who knew her so well, who had shared pieces of her life without judgment, and as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity, respect, and an undercurrent of longing that mirrored her own hidden thoughts, and the rain outside became a backdrop to their quiet revelation, a rhythm that matched the rapid beating of her heart, making every word, every glance, every small gesture feel magnified, and she noticed the small things, how he shifted in his seat when he spoke, how his fingers traced the edge of his cup as if grounding himself, how his voice softened whenever he said her name, all signaling a mixture of restraint and yearning, a careful navigation between friendship, loyalty, and something deeper that neither had fully acknowledged before. And Laura realized that even though no action had been taken, the emotional weight of their conversation had shifted the space in the room, had changed the meaning of her quiet afternoon, had made the familiar house feel charged with possibility, and as they continued to talk, she found herself speaking more openly, letting small pieces of herself show, feeling the unusual comfort of honesty, of someone who saw her beyond the surface, beyond the polite exchanges of daily life, and she recognized that Daniel's visit was a gift of sorts, a reminder of who she was beyond her role as a wife, beyond the routines and responsibilities that often left her unnoticed, and with each passing minute, the distance that had existed between them, both physical and emotional, seemed to shrink slightly, replaced by a careful closeness, a delicate intimacy formed through words and looks rather than touch, and when a pause settled between them, long enough for the silence to be felt, Laura realized that she was not just reflecting on the past but also on what remained unresolved, the questions of what if and why now that lingered like the soft drizzle outside, and Daniel's gaze held her in that quiet moment, steady, patient, and full of meaning, and she understood that this conversation, simple as it appeared, was the beginning of a reckoning, an awakening to emotions she had set aside, and the tea between them grew cold, unnoticed, as they both navigated the fragile line between friendship and unspoken feelings, both aware that the afternoon had become a turning point, not just a visit, and Laura felt the pulse of change in her chest, the stirring of her heart, and the unspoken truth that some connections, once made, never really fade, they only wait for the right moment to be remembered, acknowledged, and understood, and she knew, deep inside, that this moment with Daniel was exactly that, a quiet, powerful recognition that even years apart could not erase the bond that had always existed, a bond that lingered in their eyes, in their pauses, in the soft, meaningful exchanges of conversation, and she could not yet name it, but she felt it clearly, profoundly, like a story that had been paused and now, finally, was being read aloud once more. Laura and Daniel moved toward the window, the rain painting soft streaks across the glass, blurring the world outside while intensifying the clarity of the space between them, and as they stood side by side, she could feel a tension that was both comforting and unnerving, a mixture of familiarity and unspoken emotions, and Daniel's voice broke the quiet, low and sincere, telling her, "You were always kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it," and Laura turned to face him, feeling her chest tighten at the honesty in his words, the weight of a confession that was long overdue, and she reminded him gently that he had always been Mark's friend, someone close to her husband and part of their life in ways she had respected and valued, but Daniel's eyes held a softness and a depth that spoke of something more, something unspoken that had lingered for years, and he admitted that while he had stayed quiet, he had always noticed her, always cared in ways that went beyond friendship, and Laura's mind raced, recalling the subtle moments of the past, the conversations that went deeper than necessary, the lingering glances that had made her heart skip, the shared laughter that had carried hidden meaning, and she realized that those memories had never truly left her, that a quiet part of her heart had always remembered, always acknowledged the connection, even if it had been carefully hidden, and Daniel's words made that part of her come alive again, stirring feelings she thought were settled, feelings she had buried beneath routines and loyalty, and the room seemed smaller, charged with the energy of their unspoken history, the air thick with the weight of emotions that neither could fully name but both understood, and Laura found herself reflecting on choices and consequences, how life had taken them on separate paths, how time had created distance but not erased significance, and Daniel's presence reminded her that some connections transcend circumstance, linger in the mind and heart, and demand recognition even when inconvenient, and he spoke again, softly, almost as if confessing to himself as much as to her. We made choices, I know, and I respect them, yet his eyes contradicted the words, revealing longing and regret, the quiet wish for a different past, for conversations that might have been different, for courage that had come too late, and Laura felt the mix of emotions herself, gratitude for his honesty, sadness for the what-ifs, a pulse of something tender that she hadn't expected to feel so strongly in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and she realized that this moment, though brief and restrained, carried more significance than any casual meeting could, for it held acknowledgement, clarity, and an unspoken promise that even without action, feelings could be understood and honored, and the rain outside seemed to echo their quiet intensity, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat, marking the rhythm of unvoiced emotions, and as they stood together, neither moving closer nor farther away, Laura understood the paradox of the moment. It was intimate, yet controlled, revealing, yet safe, filled with acknowledgement without overstepping boundaries, and she sensed that Daniel's step back, his creation of a small distance, was both a gesture of respect and a reflection of his own internal struggle, a need to balance honesty with restraint, and she appreciated it, even as it left her longing for more, feeling the sharp awareness that some things in life are meant to be understood, felt, and left in a state of beautiful tension, rather than fulfilled or resolved. And as he prepared to leave, the room seemed to hold its breath, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of shared history and the brief, powerful revival of emotions that had been quietly simmering for years, and Laura felt her heart ache slightly, not with regret, but with the awareness that some connections, once formed, never truly fade, that they exist quietly beneath the surface, waiting for moments like this to remind both hearts of their presence. And when Daniel finally turned toward the door, pausing as if to take one last look, she saw in his expression everything he hadn't said, everything he had held back, all the warmth, the care, the respect, and the subtle longing that had accompanied him since the moment he arrived. And Laura realized that this encounter, though brief and controlled, had shifted something inside her, leaving a quiet resonance, a new understanding, and a deep awareness that life often gives these moments not to change the path, but to illuminate what has always been there, quietly present in the heart, patiently waiting to be recognized, acknowledged, and felt. And as the door closed behind him, the sound echoed like a punctuation to the delicate, emotional chapter that had unfolded, leaving Laura standing by the window, watching the rain, feeling the pull of memories, the stir of long-dormant emotions, and the serene yet aching knowledge that some bonds are timeless, unbroken, and quietly transformative even without a single step taken beyond acknowledgement. When Daniel finally left, the quiet that returned to the house felt different, heavier yet strangely alive, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the subtle intensity of their conversation and the unspoken emotions that had passed between them. And Laura remained by the door longer than necessary, watching his retreating figure through the drizzle outside, her mind racing with the vivid memory of his eyes, the softness in his voice, and the careful honesty in his words, realizing that nothing improper had occurred, no boundaries crossed, yet everything had shifted in a way she couldn't easily define. And as she closed the door, a shiver of awareness ran through her, a mix of longing, understanding, and a tender ache for something that had never fully existed but had been quietly present all along. And she moved through the house, noticing the faint scent of rain that clung to the air, the subtle warmth of the living room, and the lingering presence of someone who had been part of her past and, in a moment, had reminded her of the depth of connection that could survive distance, time, and circumstance. And that night, lying awake in the quiet darkness, Laura reflected on how Daniel had looked at her, the way he had spoken her name, the honesty and restraint he carried, and she realized that life often presents moments that do not demand action but instead require acknowledgement, a recognition of feelings that exist quietly beneath the surface, and she thought of Mark, her husband, and the life she had chosen, and felt a complicated tenderness in her heart, understanding that love and loyalty did not erase the human need for connection, understanding, and being seen. And when her phone buzzed the next day, it was a brief message from Daniel, simple, understated, yet carrying the weight of the afternoon's emotions. "It was good to see you. I'm glad we talked." And reading it, Laura felt a warmth that was both comforting and bittersweet, knowing that their paths had crossed in a way that reminded them both of what had existed, what had been acknowledged, and what would remain unspoken. And she replied with careful thought, "Me too. Take care, Daniel," a response that conveyed gratitude, understanding, and a quiet acceptance of the boundaries life demanded. And as she put the phone down, she lingered by the window again, watching the rain fade, feeling grounded in her life yet awakened to the complexity of human connection, the beauty of restrained emotions, and the reality that some meetings, some conversations, leave marks not because they change everything, but because they reveal truths that have always been there, quietly shaping hearts and memories. And she realized that this experience had deepened her understanding of herself, of love, of friendship, and of the ways emotions can be honored without being acted upon, and that some bonds exist not to be pursued but to be recognized, acknowledged, and remembered, a subtle and powerful presence that leaves the heart richer and more aware. And Laura understood that the afternoon with Daniel had done precisely that. It had reopened a chapter, not to be continued, but to be finally understood, leaving her with a lasting sense of connection, a quiet emotional resonance, and the profound realization that life's most meaningful moments often arrive not with grand gestures or dramatic decisions, but in small, tender exchanges that touch the soul, illuminate the heart, and stay with us in ways we can carry forever.